So it's the 2030s.
Yes.
And a lot of animals are going extinct every year.
Yeah, we should probably do something about that.
We should, except that at this point the extinctions are happening so fast that even if we stopped all industrial activity right now and became anarcho-primitivists or something, we still wouldn't be able to stop it. We'd only be able to slow it down.
Hey, I have an idea. How about we give every company in the world a certain number of credits that they need to cash into an international committee if they want to destroy the habitat of an endangered species? Then, because there's only a limited number of these extinction credits, scarcity will drive the price up over time so that companies will be forced to find better ways of making a profit than by just destroying the habitats of endangered animals.
Would that actually work?
It might. And even better, we can make an international database where we can store the connectomes and DNA sequences of endangered animals, so that even when some species do inevitably go extinct, we can still revive them later on with future technology.
Won't that make the extinction credits less valuable?
Maybe? I don't know. Economics was never really my thing.
I'm not really sure how I feel about this. I mean, we've already tried to do this sort of thing in the past for carbon emissions, and it doesn't always work.
Hey, don't overthink it. We need to do something, right? Let's just give this a shot.
So it didn't work.
Yeah.
And on top of that, somebody hacked into our database and deleted all the information about the extinct species.
Yeah.
So now the price of extinction credits is super high, but it doesn't even make a difference because we've already blown it.
Yeah, we're gonna die. I'm a big fan of science fiction books that are set in the near future rather than the distant future, in worlds that look and feel very much like our own. In the past, these books were often called cyberpunk, and while I think that label is still relevant sometimes today, I think a lot of the books getting published right now that fall into that near future sci-fi category can't really properly be called cyberpunk. And Venomous Lumpsucker, the recent novel by Ned Bowman, is a great example of this, because it features a lot of the tropes of cyberpunk, like megacorporations and flying cars and things like that, but it doesn't really feel cyberpunk, in the sense that it doesn't center around characters who are fighting against some sort of oppressive system or who are squeezing out a lives for themselves in the underbelly of a dystopian city. They're not hackers or really punk in any sense. Instead, the main characters in this book are just ordinary middle-aged people working ordinary jobs, trying to get on with their lives in a world that seems to increasingly be getting worse and doesn't really care about them. I think this type of fiction is a lot more pertinent and relevant in some ways than the cyberpunk novels that came out at the height of the craze in the 80s and 90s, although I still love a lot of those earlier cyberpunk novels as well for their own reasons. So Venomous Lumpsucker is a book that is concerned mainly with one thing, and that is extinction. Specifically, the extinction of non-human species on Earth. For those who are unaware, there have been about 5 major mass extinction events in the history of this planet, but a 6th one is currently ongoing, and this one is human-caused. There have been massive biodiversity losses in almost every phylum and almost every area of the world, and it doesn't seem like it's going to stop. In the world of this novel, this issue has become such a big deal, specifically after the extinction of the last of the great pandas some years before the book started, that an entire industry has cropped up around trying to preserve their last remaining species on Earth. And the solution they implement is basically the solution outlined in the skit at the beginning of this video. And as that skit hinted at, it doesn't exactly go well. This novel is really well researched, and as ridiculous as it can get at times, because the novel is actually very funny, everything feels at least somewhat plausible, and all of the speculative technology and industry in this book is inspired by real life. One of the things I think that made this book so entertaining for me is the dynamic between the two main characters, who are opposites in just about every conceivable way, but who find themselves working together towards a common goal, which is always a really fun trope. On the one hand, you have Karen Resaint, who is a computer scientist turned cognitive biologist who specializes in studying the intelligence of different animal species and consequently plays a major role in deciding the number of extinction credits that an industry will need to cash in order to destroy the habitat of a given species. Karen is interesting because throughout most of her early life, she didn't really care about ecology or biodiversity, but while doing field work, she came across a certain species of wasp called Adelonathus marginatum. I don't know if I'm saying that right. And the unique adaptations of this parasitic wasp led her to have a newfound appreciation for just the sheer unlikeliness of life on Earth. And after that, her #1 priority in life became protecting biodiversity. But eventually what she realizes before the start of the book is that this goal is unachievable, that biodiversity is just going to continue to decrease. And this knowledge has such a profound detrimental effect on her. And her goals morph into this bizarre fantasy where more than anything in the world, she wants to make at least one animal understand fully what humans have done to it and its species and its habitat, and for that animal to have a chance to get revenge on her. In essence, she wants to be put on trial by the animals whose habitats she as a human is complicit in destroying. It's a totally ridiculous concept, but this is the goal that drives her throughout the book. And the title of the book comes from a specific species of fish called the Venomous Lumpsucker, which she thinks has the best chance of understanding the things that she wants it to understand and therefore being able to take revenge on her. She wants to teach this fish to kill her, essentially. That's the plot of the book. The other character in this book is Mark Halyard, who actually works in the so-called extinction industry, the industry that is essentially cropped up trying to make a profit around the extinction of species because of this global framework that's put in place around extinction credits and so on. Mark is driven by a completely different goal. He's a bit of a gourmand, and he lives in a world where eating good food is increasingly an expensive luxury that very few can afford. And more than anything, he wants to be able to live lavishly and just eat all of the rich foods that he wants. And so he comes up with this insane plan of stealing extinction credits from the company he works at, sell those credits, and then because he has some intelligence that tells him that the price of extinction credits is most likely going to drop in the near future, buy back those extinction credits to get a profit. And it all goes horribly wrong when, as I mentioned at the beginning of this video, an attack on the biobanks that store the DNA sequences and connectomes and other information about various extinct species suddenly causes all of that information to go off the grid, to just be completely wiped out. Simultaneously to this, Mark's company destroys the last remaining habitat of the venomous lumpsuckers, which means that he is desperate to find a surviving member of this species to prove that it's not actually extinct. Otherwise, his company is going to have to pay massive extinction credits to the World Council on Species Extinction, which his company doesn't have because he sold them. And if they find out that he did that, he's most likely going to end up in prison for the rest of his life. And so the plot of the novel follows these two main characters brought together from entirely different circumstances to see if there are any remaining venomous lumpsuckers anywhere in the world. And their journey takes them to all sorts of increasingly insane locales. Which brings me to another point, that the world building in this book is surprisingly dense for it being only 300 pages or so long. It's all very well thought out, and there are some long passages just explaining certain facets of the history of the world or the different locations the main characters are visiting. And I think it's consistently written in a very engaging way, but it's definitely not going to be for everybody because it's quite a lot of info dumping. There are lots of little details that aren't central to the story, but are nonetheless very interesting, like how AI-generated video is now so commonplace that everybody has to have something called an authenticator chip on their phones or cameras in order to make video that other people will believe is actually real footage. And then there's a lot of really quirky elements of the world building too, like how certain groups of pro-environmental activists grow these massive tumors out of the salvaged DNA of the last great panda and launch them at executives who are complicit in environmental destruction as a form of protest. It's all very colorful and heightened and a bit ridiculous, but also grounded enough that it doesn't feel like total fantasy, if you know what I mean. I think the central theme of this book, in a lot of ways, is the intrinsic value of biodiversity, which is a really interesting subject to explore. According to Karen Resaint, every individual animal species is a work of art more priceless than anything humans could ever produce. Even something as small as like a certain type of dung beetle found only on an island off the coast of South America is infinitely more valuable than the Mona Lisa or Michelangelo's David. It's an interesting perspective, and I think it's even more interesting for me because I don't really agree with it. While I can see where this character is coming from, I think there is a real sense in which biodiversity for its own sake is not as intrinsically valuable as she makes it out to be, and it really sort of just comes down to personal taste. Like, there are certain species that exist in the natural world that I think it would be better off if they just didn't exist. Like parasites, for instance. Is each individual species of parasitic organism intrinsically more valuable than any work of human art? I don't think so, but I also am aware that I'm biased because I myself am such a different type of being that it's hard for me to understand the perspective of the parasite, so to speak, insofar as they have any perspective. The book brings up a lot of questions of where value comes from. There's this question of if a species goes extinct and nobody even knew that it existed, or maybe only a few people who specialized in biology, then did it really have any value? Karen Resaints thinks that it did. She thinks that every species has intrinsic value, regardless of whether anybody even knows that it exists. And I can see that perspective, but I don't know where that value was coming from in that case, so I'm not entirely sure why I would agree with it. And then there's this question of non-human animals taking revenge on humans for what we've done to them, which is quite a chilling concept, as silly as it might sound at first. It's frightening, I think, to consider that all of the things we've done to non-human animals, we would never have done if they were just a little bit more like us, if they were smarter, if they could actually understand what we were doing to them and fight back in a meaningful way. But because they can't, we just take advantage of them. And sometimes for some really intelligent species, I can't help but wonder, do they have any idea what humans have done to the world? Do they know why their habitats are shrinking? Recently, there have been some headlines about a group of orcas off the coast of Gibraltar attacking and sinking human ships. And even though I realize this is probably just some game among the orcas, just some fun pastime, after reading this book, I can't help but have that thought, like, are they in some sense trying to take revenge on humans? Do they have greater awareness of their own place in the world than we think they do? Probably not, but it's interesting. I think this book is going to be one of those books where every once in a while I'm going to see something in the news and it's going to make me think of it again, and I'd be like, wow, that book predicted a lot of things. So this is a delightfully funny and dark and thoughtful book, and I highly recommend it. I think it's a great read. It's super short. It's fun. It's interesting. It's a lot of things that I like in a book. Thank you all so much for watching. Be sure to subscribe if you enjoyed the video. I do lots of book reviews here in between my other videos. Yeah, have a great week and stay generic.